13:15 पे एग्जैक्टली स्टार्ट होगा ना? ठीक है, 2 मिनट। इसमें एक पेन वाला इशू है। Hello everyone, welcome to this live session which is about the achievements of India at G20. What are we about to discuss here? We are about to discuss this historic moment when India has been able to finally come at a consensus regarding its G20 outcomes. That there has been this declaration which has been finally adopted through consensus by all the member countries. And this is why this is historic, because the reason for this is that, you see, there was a lot of troubles here, there were a lot of issues here. And what are these issues basically? These issues were related to the present geopolitical problems of the world, the way world order is fragmented right now. And despite that, despite the fact that in all the ministerial meetings of India, which have happened with regards to the last year, in the last 1 year, with regards to G20, in all these ministerial meetings, there was no effort and there was no consensus as in. But finally, even before the end of today, because today was the One Future Summit, and despite that, just yesterday only, this declaration, the New Delhi Declaration, has been adopted. Prime Minister had also given statement in this regard. So we'll try to look at it, that how this was achieved, as in what were the problems here for India. Apart from these geopolitical problems, we will try to look at the problems first, and then we'll understand from the present geopolitical, economic and other scenarios like the global problems. We'll try to connect whatever has been achieved through this G20, whatever has been mentioned in this New Delhi Declaration and the outcomes of G20 to the present problems, so that we can remember this for our exam also. So this is our objective. Hello, good afternoon. And do keep me updated on the comment section also. I'll keep on asking the questions and we'll try to have this session as interactive as we can, so that we can achieve the outputs of maximum learning. So let's move forward. First of all, for people who are giving mains this year, this is also important. And for those who will give mains this year, first of all, just tell me, what are the major subjects in the syllabus of the UPSC exam? What do you think are the major subjects here? And how can you connect the G20 part with this? In GS1, how many subjects are there? How many sections are there? What do you prepare when you start speaking of that, ma'am, I have to prepare GS1 portions? Any comments? Any solutions to this? Anyone who remembers the entire syllabus subject-wise from GS1 to GS4? Okay, I think the comments will take time to come up. Till then, I'll slightly explain it. In GS1, you have, first of all, your history portions. There are 5 portions in history, not just one, by the way. What are these portions? You have ancient history, medieval history, modern history, world history, post-independence history, right? Then after history, you have geography. In geography, you have the physical portions and the resource geography portions. Physical geography, you can divide again into world and India. But you can also divide the physical portions into sub-subjects, sections called geomorphology, oceanography, climatology, and so on and so forth. Then we have this society portion. Likewise, we have subjects in GS2 also. Which are these subjects? We have polity here. We have social justice here. We have IR here, international relations portion, by the way, which we try to ignore, but there are significant questions asked from it also. And then we have the governance portions here. The portions related to e-governance, role of transparency, accountability, role of NGOs, civil service organizations, etc. here. Then we have the GS3 portions. We have economy, environment, science and tech, disaster management, and internal security. All right. And then in GS4, we have ethics portion, the ethics and human interface wala portion. This portion little bit theoretical. Then we have the aptitude, attitude related portions. EI, emotional intelligence, is also part of it. The basic of all this in ethics is the philosophical portions, the thoughts, as you read Immanuel Kant, Gandhiji, Plato, and all other thinkers. And then you have the next portion as governance portions in ethics. Because governance and ethics are a bit interrelated. So why am I discussing here? Because the agenda for discussion today is G20. Why am I wasting time here? The reason is that you should be able to remember this entire framework of all the subjects. If one wakes you up from your sleep, that ma'am, that what is the subjects here? What are all the subjects? Just give me a list. You should be able to recall this. Why? Because this helps you in analyzing. UPSC syllabus is so broad that you can analyze any major event which is happening around the world right now. So utilizing the same framework, we'll try to analyze that what are the outcomes of G20, what are the major portions of the New Delhi Declaration here. And because G20, when it was formed in the 1990s, in the late 1990s, after the Asian financial crisis, because it was an economic forum to ensure cooperation so that there is financial stability around the world by partnership between developed and developing countries. Developed countries means advanced countries, the Western countries, and developing countries means the, yes, all right, I'll just use another marker here. So what is the objective here? That there is to be cooperation inside the G20 for this. So now, because this is the forum for economic cooperation, I'll just first of all move towards the GS3 portions towards economy by first of all describing the geopolitical scenario and what have been the outcomes regarding to it, and then we'll move forward. So this G20 summit was very historic. Why? Because of the crisis in the world. What is the crisis in the world right now? As you can see, there is this Russia-Ukraine war which is going on. From what time period it is going on? It is going on from last year. Now the problem is that this war is going on. But before this war, there was this problem of pandemic. The entire world, global supply chains, they were impacted. The economies were impacted heavily here, right? Apart from that, what are the problems here? The other problems are also related to the problems of geopolitics. What are these problems? The new Cold War. What is this new Cold War? The Cold War, which is renewed. Earlier, the Cold War before the 1990s was between Soviet Union and USA. Now this Cold War is between USA and China. So there is this new Cold War which is happening here. And combined with all these problems, there are these issues of climate change. People are mentioning inflation in the comment. Yes, there is inflation. Why? Because of the pandemic as well as because of the war. So there is inflation here, yes. So there is also one of the problems impacting the emerging economies more, although the developed economies like the United Kingdom are also being impacted here. So combined with all this is the problem of climate change. What is the recent disaster which hurt India? This was Biparjoy cyclone, which impacted the coast of Gujarat. Likewise, there is this increase in the disasters because of climate change. There is this increase in the man-animal conflict. Example of it, pandemic itself. We'll try to see it. So this is the problem. This is the entire scenario. And in that context, the coming up of consensus at G20 was difficult. Why? Because the Western countries were saying that in the G20 discussions, in all the ministerial meetings, in the finance track, that you need to keep Russia out of it, that you have to declare Russia as an aggressor, that we have to declare Russia as an aggressor in context of Ukraine war, and then Russia was resisting it. So for India, it was difficult bringing up to the consensus, but finally a toned down language has been adopted in this summit, which says that the countries have to respect the mandate of the United Nations Charter. What does this charter say? This charter says that every country which is part of the United Nations has to respect the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the member states of every country, and sovereignty and territorial integrity of every country has to be respected. So this was the language which was adopted here, and you can clearly observe no mention, no name of Russia has been adopted, and because of which yesterday it was possible to arrive at a consensus. And India, what it did, you might have heard this phrase, strike when the iron is hot. That means whenever you find the opportunity, you strike the iron at that time only. You don't wait for the next 24 hours for the entire G20 summit to over and for the countries, both the blocks, the Eastern bloc as well as the Western blocks, to ruminate and then to change the outcome. And that is why India, yesterday, the PM Modi had declared that we have this consensus. So this was regarding the consensus here. This was regarding the geopolitical issues here. And there has been this huge appreciation for India. Why? Because in the Bali summit also, most of the discussions there also, the last year, because Indonesia held the G20 presidency last year. Friends, you might be knowing that there is this rotational basis of presidency of G20. In newspapers also it is coming up that there are these 5 groupings in which the 19 countries of G20 are adopted. I am not saying 20 countries because the 20th member is the European Union, which is a bloc itself. So among these 19 countries, there are these 5 groups, and the presidency rotates among these 5 groups. So it's not that it rotates in the countries, country by country basis, but it rotates among the groups. And here there is need to remember this. Why? Because in UPSC Prelims also, something around this framing an objective question based on this and the applied part can be asked. So now what's the problem here? What's the solution here? Which why India is being appreciated? Because in the Bali summit also, there was this criticism, and they were the consensus, coming up of consensus was affected. So India finally, because of its important and significant relations with both the Western bloc as well as the Russians, with USA as well as the Russia, have finally come up at the consensus. Yes, it is right. Russia is the top importer of defense technology, and that is why also our views regarding Russia are impacted here. We don't directly criticize the Ukraine war here. So yes, India had this policy. You might have seen in the news, there was this import of Russian oil. So yes, all this has been there. So this is one of the factors. So now next move forward to the next agenda, that what is the other important thing here apart from this coming up of consensus? Because if there is consensus, there should be use of that consensus to come up at important points here, that we should be having these important points. As you have seen, there are these problems. There is this problem of climate change, global warming, and the economies also have been impacted because of the pandemic. Now, what's the solution here and why we are discussing it here is that this is creating a double issue, a double problem, a crisis for the emerging economies. Why? Because the global south nations, like the small island developing states, who are the small island developing states? The island states in the Indo-Pacific, in other oceans of the world, part of the global south. and these island states are witnessing the global rising sea levels, because these will be the first who will submerge once the sea level rises. And then there are these problems in Africa also. There is already poverty here. Now in this times of poverty, agriculture is being impacted because of climate change. Other sectors are being impacted, disasters are coming up, and then pandemic happened, and then borders closed. So these countries had witnessed a lot of inequities, including the vaccine inequities. And that is why India said that we should ensure here the voice of the global south. And because G20 is an important grouping, it consists of more than 80% of share of economies around the world. G20 together consists of more than 85% of GDP around the world. And that is why it's important that the voice of the South here is ensured. And how do you ensure the voice of the global South here? You ensure it by including the countries who are not part of the G20 right now. Even though they might not be playing that important role in the economy part, like in the world GDP contribution, then also they should be included in this G20. And that is why African Union as a stakeholder has been included as part of the G20. So India yesterday announced, although the initiative for including African Union had been from earlier times, like it was not that it is the first time the talk of including African Union has been there, but substantially for the first time it's there that African Union has been formally adopted as part of G20. What is this grouping African Union? What are its objectives? When it was formed? And where is its headquarters? All these are important for your prelims portion. So what is this African Union? It is a union for the political and economic convergences of all the countries of the Africa. It is different than the regional groupings. Like in the Western Africa, we have ECOWAS, and likewise in other regions, but this is a Pan-Africa grouping. It was formed in 2001 and its headquarters is in Addis Ababa. So this is how you have to prepare for your prelims portions also. Now what it will ensure? It will ensure that the voice of these countries apart from South Africa are also included in the G20 nations, because till now only South Africa has been part of the G20 portions. So this is regarding the other priority which is happening here, which has happened. Now I'll come, apart from this economy and the geopolitical discussion, towards the main agenda, the main problem, the existential problem which is there around the world right now. What is the most existential problem? We are discussing it from a long time, climate change. Now why this climate change is integrated into a grouping which is there for the economic discussions? Because climate change and environment are affecting all the sectors of our world. So what is the objective achieved here? What does this principle, what does this New Delhi Declaration, the long document, what does this say about? It says that there should be this balanced growth around the world. There should be sustainable growth where the concerns of the economy are also tackled. But how do you tackle the concerns of the global environmental problems? Because as we said, there are these problems here. What are the challenges here? That the developing countries have to develop themselves, have to get out of poverty, and they can't use carbon emissions to get out of this poverty here. Why? Because the CO2 emissions, the global CO2 concentrations has reached to more than 400 ppms around the world right now. This is the data. And in this context, there is pressure on these developing countries that you have to adopt the new technologies, like generating energy from renewable sources. Now, there's a problem here. In solar and wind, if you switch off the if there is no sunshine, then there is problem in generation of solar energy. So there are these variabilities. These are intermittent. These provide intermittent technologies. Even if we improve battery technologies, even if we improve the technologies, the storage technologies, then also there are issues here. And likewise, there are issues in this transition to clean energy, because this will cause problems of funding here. And this also includes high-tech and technological advancements which are lacking with these countries. So in this context, what the New Delhi Declaration says, that we should ensure the just energy transition. What is the just energy transition? That means there should be transition of energy from utilization of conventional to non-conventional sources, but it should be done in a just manner. And how it will be done in a just manner? When there will be sufficient funding available to the developing countries. In 2009 Copenhagen Summit of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there was this agreement that will give around $100 billion to the developing countries. And India has reiterated again and again at the forums that this commitment has not been fulfilled. Now, in one of the reports of this G20 discussions itself, we have again said that now not just 100 billion of funds, but annually around $4 trillion of funds will be needed. And where these funds will be needed? To ensure this just transition into renewable energy, into sustainable economic growth. And that is why we have arrived at a consensus here that there will be from 2024, there will be agreement that minimum at floor level, there will be financing of the climate funds of a minimum floor level of $100 billion. And this has been achieved, this has been agreed upon. Now let us see whether this will be implemented. But here we are talking about the developed countries providing the funds. But what is about the developing countries? I mean, can't India and China, because they have somehow ensured coming out of poverty of a large domestic sections, can't they help these countries? The answer is yes. So in this regard, India has said that India will ensure funding and partnership with the developing economies, with the global south, but India does it in its own way. So the approach of India right since the times of independence is not exploitation, but it ensures capacity development. So in this context, to promote solar energy, you might have heard it in news again, we had this International Solar Alliance. By the way, where is the headquarters of the International Solar Alliance? If anyone can tell me. Where is the headquarters? So till now the answers come up, let's move forward. So the headquarters, so what's there? In International Solar Alliance, there is this concept called one sun, one world and one grid. And on these lines, that there should be cooperation to connect the landmass of Africa with Asia, to connect these around the world, to connect the world around in one grid of solar energy. On these idea, because this became successful, we are now adopting the Global Biofuel Alliance as well. So this came up as another of the priorities in the climate change. What is this Global Biofuel Alliance here? This will ensure cooperation, but not just among the government sectors at G2G level, but also among the civil society organizations, among cooperatives around the world for greater adoption of biofuels. Now let's connect this to India. That what are these biofuels? How it will help the Indian scenario? Because if it helps India, we can say that yes, it will also help the other emerging economies. So what is biofuel first of all? The fuel which is achieved from the biological sources. One example I'll give. We burn this stubble. Every year there is problem of stubble burning. So now there are being efforts being done to ensure that this stubble burning, this doesn't happen. This stubble is rather utilized to generate energy. So whatever energy we develop from the carbonaceous form of matter, because carbon is the basis of life of all on the earth. So that is biofuel, the fuel we generate in this manner. Now how it will help? It will help farmers. As I said, that it will also reduce pollution. It will also ensure that the agri waste is produced, is utilized in this manner. If you utilize sugarcane for the production of biofuel, then the pressure on the government to provide a minimum price, to provide a fair and remunerative price for the sugarcane to develop sugar, that will reduce, because we have this abundance of sugarcane, and in that context the overall sugar production goes up, and then the demand is not that, the demand is declining for the sugar. Gurgaon, yes, people are right. The headquarters of International Solar Alliance is in Gurgaon. So this is the overall scenario here that we are trying to ensure that through these efforts, India is trying to help the global south here. Likewise, there are some other problems also. There are problems of food, food availability, food security, and so on and so forth. What are these problems? Agriculture is being impacted by climate change, and we are still away from doing away and prohibiting the restrictive practices, the exploitative practices. What are the exploitative practices we practice in agriculture? Like having the rice irrigation in drought-prone areas. What does it lead to? Rice requires a lot of water for growing. It leads to groundwater withdrawal. It leads to a lot of problems. So what should we do here? What should we ensure here? We should ensure that we develop sustainable agriculture. And to further meet our needs of food security, like not just in terms of calories, but also in terms of important micronutrients, to tackle up the hidden hunger, the phenomena of hidden hunger. You might have seen, you might have read it in essays also. People quote this in terms of food security, that there is this problem of hidden hunger around the world. To tackle all this, what we need is adoption of healthy food, healthy lifestyle regarding food, healthy food habits, and that is why India is promoting millets. 2023 was also the International Year of Millets. Now in this G20, there is this adoption of Deccan Principles on food and nutrition security. This is how it is connected to the present times. As we said earlier, that we'll try to connect things to the present scenarios so that we are better able to remember things. So this is how this is connected. Likewise, to promote food security further for the marginalized sections, for the poor people, there is a need to ensure that these people get healthy sources of protein, and that too at in a sustainable manner, that there should be less carbon emissions while growing up of this protein, while cultivating this protein, and then it should be affordable to everyone. And here the importance of blue economy comes up, because around the huge coast of India, there are so many farmers and coastal population. They depend on fishing, but then that fishing is, they are still poor. There is lot of poverty. Why? Because modernized practices are not available. Because of the climate change, the fish catch will be impacted here, and then the food security will also be impacted, because the fish is a good source of protein. And that is why we have these Chennai principles on blue economy regarding food security in G20. So this is how this is connected to the climate change. So that is the overall scenario regarding climate change and the major initiatives here. Likewise, it's not just important to focus on growth, on economy, as well as the sustainable growth. It is also important that we focus on increasing the clout of India around the world. We should increase the clout, and we should provide healthier alternatives, sustainable, viable financial alternatives where India feels lagging. Because around the world there's a perception that India's infrastructure implementation that is quite poor. India is good in commitments, but not that good in fulfilling those commitments and delivering upon the infrastructure building and project implementation in a timely manner. And that is why there has been this. Firstly, we have a huge economic gap vis-a-vis China. And then China, in its quest for global hegemony, to again become the middle kingdom of the world, it announced its Belt and Road Initiative. And then again, there was this problem. Why? Because this Belt and Road Initiative, it did not take India's concerns into account. It is like having a land route, having a sea route also. Sea route is called as maritime polar that road. Now, what's the problem here is that India feels encircled in this manner. In this, because there's this is like encircling India in a network of infrastructure where there is a problem because this infrastructure financing, there are allegations here that these projects are nothing but white elephants. And what China tries to do is that it tries to trap the emerging economies into a debt trap. And the best example of it is Hambantota, as it comes in the news often. India has diamond necklace, then I feel that we should say it as string of pearls policy. And India is also countering the string of pearls in a counter string of pearls. Coming back to the topic, debt trap, Hambantota is the best example. China will give loans at low interest rates. Then the countries, they'll build up the infrastructure which have limited utility. Like Hambantota port, it was envisaged right since start that it has limited utility, not much utility here. So again, the outcomes will not be there. Infrastructure will be built, but the revenue will not come. Revenue will not come, then the country which has taken the debt, it will feel like debt ridden. If any problem comes up at the global level, then again it will be difficult to fulfill its debt obligations, and then China will say that I'll acquire this infrastructure. Like there's this 99 years of lease to China of the Hambantota port. So to counter all this, Western countries and India were thinking for a long time that how do we tackle this? How do we ensure sustainable ways of financing? And in this context, one project has come up, which is known as the corridor, the India Middle East European Economic Corridor. The name itself suggests India, it will contain India. Middle East, we Indians say the West Asia portion to Middle East, the same portion of Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Gulf countries, Syria. These countries, what Western countries do denote it as Middle East, India says these same countries as West Asia, because for us they are part of Asia, but the western part of Asia. So there is difference of connotation here. India might name this project differently, but let us understand the concept here. So what is this? India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. It will connect India with the West Asian countries here. There are these West Asian countries like this Gulf countries. Now it will connect this to Europe. What it will ensure? Is it just a connectivity corridor? Like, okay, we'll construct this railroad, we'll construct this shipping parts, we'll ensure shipping, and then we'll ensure some transfer of goods, transportation of goods, and that would be sufficient. Is it the objective here? The answer is no. This is much broader. This is sort of an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative. And India is trying to focus on the principles here in this initiative about the demand-driven approach. That our demand here should be from the countries themselves about the development of the projects in this area. And then we should utilize this corridor for the transportation of the goods of the developing countries, between trade between the developed like Europe and the other developing countries, so that we could ensure proper development. So there's this focus on financial sustainability and environment sustainability. So now we can say that there is this consolidation, there's this development of concrete ideas around an alternative to the India. Okay, someone is mentioning Chahbar Port. Yes, Chahbar Port was one of the initiatives, but then the problems with Iran happened. So that's why there are these issues here in this regard. So what are the outcomes here? We understood the major outcomes, the major achievements of India. So this was regarding this. Now coming back to what we were discussing in the starting, the syllabus parts. Now, how do we connect it? Because these were the major objectives here, the major achievements, but I'll just try to connect these and the other outcomes, what was mentioned in the report right now, to the syllabus overall. So that you can, in any part of the syllabus, if it comes up, we can learn that, okay, how do we mention the G20 and achievements here? So that is the idea. What did we discuss? History, geography, society, polity, governance, social justice, IR, then what was it? Economy, internal security, environment, disaster management, science and tech, and then we have ethics, right? Now I'll ask some questions connecting these dimensions. What is the history of G20? G20, I'll just give basic information for prelims part. It was formed in the late 1990s, as we discussed, after the Asian financial crisis, when the money was pulled out from these countries like Malaysia, like Indonesia, and then that's why there was this crisis, these economies went down, and then the impact of it was felt around the world. So at that point of time, the world thought that we should just not have the G7, but we should have the G20, as in cooperation between developed and developing countries. That was it. Now what happened? Fast forward to the global financial crisis of 2007-8. There was this global financial crisis. The US Lehman Brothers collapsed. So what happened? They started pulling investment from around the world. Why? Because the US had its problem, the investors had the problem. In the US, they'll pull out their money, they'll require the money. Now what happened was that then it was realized that it's not just about the global financial issues, but the overall G20 should also have the Sherpa track here. The finance track was already having, then we had the Sherpa track. What is this Sherpa track? These Sherpas, this is a Nepali word, are nothing but guiding. The people who are experts who guide to the individual countries. All the finance ministers and all the finance track working groups, all the meetings which happen here, the outcomes of this will go to the Sherpa track. The Sherpa track then will filter out, will decide upon the commitments, the objectives, and then it will be finally adopted at the Leaders Summit. And right now, the summit which happened on September 9th and 10th, that is nothing but the Leaders Summit. Yes, people are mentioning about Nepal in the comment here regarding the Sherpa. So that is there. This is the history that Sherpa track came up in Washington Summit of 2008. The earlier finance track was already happening when the G20 was formed. Now fast forward to this, today's times. What is the other aspect here? The other aspect was geography. Regarding geography, what we have to remember here, all these G20 countries, just plot them on a map. Right now, what are these countries? There are countries like USA, there is UK, there is India, there is South Africa, there is Mexico, and so on and so forth. Do map these countries around the world and now add one more, Africa here. Because African Union is part of it. So now see that how broad the area is it occupying, is the G20 nations occupying. So do prepare a world map for it. Why? Because in exam, in geography, if you draw a world map, India map, then only you can get extra points here. Brazil is there, yes. So this happened. Now what was the other aspect? Society aspect. If I give you a challenge that you have to categorize the society into some components, like give me 6 components. If I say that do analyze the implications of digital economy upon the society, like Indian society, whether smartphones, how they have impacted the Indian society, positively or negatively. Now you should understand that in exam, you should be able to learn the breakup of society. How do you break this society? How do you break it? We'll start with the family. In family, there are multiple people, right? Who are these? There are children, There are young people. In there is this component of gender. So there is women's issues that comes up. There are elderly, right? These are dependents. And then there are youth who are generally earning in nature. Now we came to the community part. In community part, what are the major rifts in our society? What is the major societal breakup? The major breakup is with respect to caste, with respect to religion, with respect to language maybe. Language is also connected to political, all these aspects. All right. So this is how you break up society. Now how it is related to the G20 principles, because the G20 declaration this year has also said that we'll try to ensure that the vulnerable populations of the society are able to cope up with climate change, and will try to ensure that the present problems are not impacting these vulnerable sections. There are steps taken towards it. Like children, there's this connection of society and social justice in the syllabus. Children are connected to education, to schools, and in this context, the G20 has said that will ensure adoption of AI, but the safe adoption of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence has impacted the education sector a lot. Everyone might have heard of Chat GPT, how simply we can utilize the Chat GPT for the uh, education sector. So this has, because that's why it is coming up in news, AI for multiple portions, and here the G20 have agreed that will ensure safe adoption and regulation of AI, considering the G20 principles of 2019 regarding the artificial intelligence. So this is how you can mention it in a question related to artificial intelligence. Polity portion, we have already seen the geopolitical scenario, international relations portion. Environment portion we have seen, economics portion we have seen, but there is one more aspect left related to the internal security. What is that portion which is left regarding internal security? For India, if you see what are the major problems for India, there is border management issues. We have border disputes with China, Pakistan, but then we have also the issue of non-state actors. We have the issue of terrorism, right? Terrorism are nothing but non-state actors. From where do these terrorists get their funding? They get this through money laundering. Now, who is cooperating in the world, which body, to ensure that there is restriction on terrorism and money laundering? This is Financial Action Task Force. This was in news. Financial Action Task Force had put Pakistan into grey list, right? So in this context, in the G20 summit, what's happening here is that India has again said that it will fully cooperate with Financial Action Task Force regarding money laundering. That is there. And then India has said that we need to stop terrorism, we need to ensure that we take actions against terrorism, and so on and so forth. So these are the general terms which we use whenever there is any such agreement, any such grouping outcomes, etc. So this is how you have to connect it with all the syllabus. So now what you do is that you just take a broad overview of the outcomes which have come up, the entire text of the New Delhi Declaration. Just look at the headings, the keywords, try to skim and look at the major phrases. Like there's this Deccan Principles. Likewise, there's this Chennai Principles on blue economy. Likewise, there are these high-level principles on multiple things. So do look out for these keywords, Global Biofuel Alliance, this initiative, and then connect it with all the parts of your syllabus from GS1 to GS4 so that you are well prepared. Whenever any question is asked across the GS papers about any of these topics, you can just mention it in those relevant portions. So any doubts we can ask? Yes, FATF Pakistan is removed now from the list. Yes, that is there. That's why I have said that FATF had put Pakistan into FATF list. Earlier it had put, now it has been removed. But Pakistan goes in and out frequently out of the FATF list. So that's there. I'll just wait for 10 more seconds, like 10-15 more seconds. If there are any questions regarding this summit, if we have to ask, then I'll just close the session here. Yeah. How it is connected with ethics? I'll give one example here. That's a good question, that how do we connect the current affairs and how do we connect it with ethics basically? First of all is the theme. One earth, one family, one future. This was the logo. What is the theme here? Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. This itself denotes what India is trying to ensure, what is its foreign policy regarding international ethics. There is a portion in your ethics syllabus called international ethics. There are other portions also. There is a portion called ethics and human interface, which is among the first lines of your syllabus itself. In ethics and human interface, there are portions like the applied ethics. Like suppose there is this gene technology, genetical modification, the use of CRISPR-Cas9, then what are the ethical implications of it? If there is use of artificial intelligence, as we discussed just some time back, then what are the ethical implications arising out of the use of artificial intelligence? Now G20 might not have, the declaration might not have this exact key term that there should be this ethical principles, but you can mention in the conclusion with regard to if any question is asked regarding AI or any other emerging technology on which the G20 has this discussion, on which there were these discussions in ministerial meetings, or there is mention in the final word. If any question is asked related to that, you can simply mention in the conclusion that G20 as a summit, the New Delhi Declaration of 2023 has also mentioned that there should be this balanced approach to the regulation of this technology regarding the use of it, and then there should be this international cooperation. Just to ensure that there is more concreteness in your answer. Mention of these New Delhi Declaration, these principles, G20 principles and these key terms, that just ensures more concreteness in your answers. All right, so I think most of the doubts are tackled. Rest, if anything is left, you can ask in the class itself of Samachar Manthan. So we can cover that in the Samachar Manthan portions also. As I only cover the Samachar Manthan portions of international relations, environment, science and tech and so on and so forth. So we'll cover that there also. So yes, all the very best for the preparation and thank you.